Hello and welcome to how to create a pivot table in VBA step by step. So what we'll do is we'll start out with our data that you see here on the screen. We've got 4 columns: employee, state, position, and salary. So what we want to do is create a pivot table using VBA. Now, traditionally, what we will do to create a pivot table is you would select any area in the data and you go to insert pivot table from pivot table data range, and you choose new worksheet, and you put in how you want the position or the pivot table to be displayed. So that's how you normally would create a pivot table, something like this. But we're going to automate this process. So I'm going to go to the developer tab. Now, if you don't have the developer tab, what you would do is, if you don't have the developer tab, you'd right click in the ribbon, go to customize ribbon, and check the developer checkbox and hit OK. And now you have access to the developer tab. You click inside of it and you choose Visual Basic. Let's go to Insert Module. So the first thing we're going to do is declare our variables. So I'm going to create some variables. There they are. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a blank worksheet. All right. So if we were to run this Right now, let's see what we get. Now we need to create a new worksheet. So what we have is our data tab and a new worksheet called pivot table. Next thing we're going to do is define the data range. So to define the data range, you've got two variables, one called last row that defines the last row of the data sheet, and last column, which defines the last column of the worksheet. So if we were to do a debug.print on the last row, we get 15 right here, because 15 is the last used row. We did a debug.print on last column, we get 4. 4 is the last used column, which is column D. So we're just defining our data. All right, so the next step is to define the pivot cache. Now, the pivot cache is something that automatically gets generated when you create a pivot table. It's an object that holds a replica of the data source. While you can't see it, it's part of the workbook. Okay? So we're going to define the pivot cache. It's right here. Now, this line right here, it says create pivot table, table destination. This will define where we're going to actually put the pivot table itself. You'll see once we start to build it. The next step is to insert a blank pivot table. I'm going to insert the blank pivot table. So let's run this, see what we get. So we have a pivot table with our pivot fields displayed here on the right. The next step we're going to do is insert our row fields. So our row fields are going to be for the employee and state columns. Then we're going to have our salary being summarized. And the last step is to format the pivot table. So let's run this first and see our results. So we have our pivot table with our salary formatted. Now let's format the pivot table. And here's our results. We've got our pivot table with the format that we want. Now, look, like I said earlier, this table destination, right now it's on cells 1, comma 1, which is right here, cell A1. So if we change this, let's say we can do 4, comma 4 and run it. Now pivot table starts here. Let's change it back. So that's the process of how to create a pivot table. The pivot table is a powerful tool that you can calculate, summarize, and analyze your data, and it lets you make comparisons and see patterns and trends in your data. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.